Hey everybody, and welcome to Breaking Biotech, everybody's favorite biotechnology podcast. My name is Matt, and thank you very much for watching. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, or leave me a comment, and I would greatly appreciate it. So today we're going to be talking about Trevena, which is a company that only recently got on my radar, but there was so much excitement about their advisory committee meeting that was taking place this week that I thought I'd look a little bit more into them, and it was a little bit too risky for me to make a play, but I think there's some lessons that we can take away here, and I thought I'd provide some value in that respect, because it's kind of it's a sad story, but as we go through it, there's things that we can take away that I think will be helpful in the future. So the company's been around for a while, and they have a product known as Oliceridine. I think that's how you say it. It's a GPCR. It's a mu opioid agonist. So it's similar to morphine and other opiates in that respect, but it's specific for the mu receptor, and that's the one that is associated with euphoria and associated with pain relief. So they're trying to get this product through, and they've done a bunch of studies for it. But politically, culturally, opiates are not very hot right now. There's a lot of negative press surrounding them, and so that's kind of an aside, really, because if the drug does happen to work better than morphine, and morphine's in every single hospital today, there could be a serious amount of revenue to be made. But a lot of times the agency is reluctant to approve a drug unless it's substantially better than the existing standard of care, and that's not always the case. And this is where you need to be relatively creative when you're deciding on whether or not to go ahead and put money on an investment related to a company that has a product that might or might not be better than the current standard. And that does relate to side effects as well, because if there's fewer side effects that are life-threatening, and there are some associated with morphine, then this could be a candidate that the agency might be interested in approving. So if we go back, the company did a phase 2 study right here, where they showed that it works. They did a phase 2 or 3 phase 3 studies, to Apollo 1, Apollo 2, and then an open label phase 3 study to look at how 3 different doses of Oliceridine compared to placebo and how it compared to morphine. And what they found was, we'll look at the combined results in a second, but what they found was that the highest dose of Oliceridine, all the top 2 doses of Oliceridine substantially reduced pain. The top dose was comparable to morphine in terms of pain reduction, and there were maybe slight decreases in some side effects. So respiratory depression, what else? Gastrointestinal side effects. Those are relatively common with morphine, and there was a slight improvement in Trevena studies. So they're going to obviously argue their point that the real hot takeaway from this drug is that you get fewer side effects for the same amount of efficacy that you see compared to morphine. So these are the data that they presented to the FDA. And then this week, we got the briefing document from the FDA, which is they released this in advance of the advisory committee meeting so that people can look at it. But it showed pretty much what the point of the advisory committee meeting was and what they're going to be discussing. So if we go through, we're not going to go through all of it. You can see that it's a pretty substantial packet of info where they group a lot of data together. They talk about meetings that the company had with the FDA. So we get some insight into how they came to their decisions on statistical analysis and endpoints and things like that. So one of the things, so the draft points to consider, they're going through the efficacy, they're going through the safety, they're going through whether or not, they should approve this drug and whether or not it's better than the standard. So, and then they also ask these questions, if not, what data are needed? So even if there's no added efficacy of Oliceridine, would more data be helpful in convincing that there's a safety benefit or something like that? So these are the points that they're talking about in this advisory committee meeting. And the people who are advisors, there's a lot of doctors, there's there's more like community type people than there are actual FDA appointed types. So it's more of a general opinion, I would say, in terms of the population and less of just a few bureaucrats. So when it comes to things like cultural importance and how opiates are in the news all the time about the opioid crisis, that doesn't really help when it comes to an advisory committee meeting, which represents more of the public. So going into it, it's kind of got that negative feel. But, it could be spun in that if there are fewer side effects, then maybe this is a substantial improvement to the opiate that everybody relies on in the hospital. Okay, so something else that's interesting that came out yesterday was they submitted a Form 8K to the SEC, and it kind of clarified how they decided on their endpoint. And I'm not sure why they actually submitted this. Like, I'm not exactly sure what about this is relevant right now. So they said that in the meeting, the end of their phase 2 meeting, they had multiple meetings with the FDA, and they said that the FDA required them to use responder rate instead of this 30% improvement in summed pain intensity, and they also must incorporate people who discontinued as non-responders, and that's what the company did. But a lot of people on the internet are saying that this is good enough reason to bring a lawsuit against Trevena, and I'm not really seeing that right here because they did do this. So they used responder rate as an endpoint in collaboration with the FDA, and they also incorporated patients who discontinued as non-responders. So I'm not sure if this is the problem that people see, or it's more related to the details of this advisory committee document that show that there wasn't very much positive that the FDA had to say about Trevena's original plan. So if we go to the beginning of the document, the FDA has diligent notes about all the meetings that the company had with the FDA. And if you go through some of this, it's it's a negotiation with a lot of this stuff. The company wants the lowest bar possible to get approval, and the FDA has their own standard. So, dosing. The FDA didn't like their dosing studies. The FDA didn't agree with the primary endpoint. The FDA didn't agree with the amount of, they wanted additional safety, heart monitoring. They didn't like the justification for the responder definition. So you could imagine that behind closed doors, this happens all the time. So every single company that wants FDA approval wants the lowest barrier to entry, and they're going to argue their point and try to get away with as much as they can. And it's the FDA's job to, hold a good standard, hold a standard that encourages safety for the public and encourages efficacy. So the only argument I could see for bringing some sort of lawsuit is that the company wasn't clear with the public when this was going on about their discussions with the FDA. And I don't know exactly what sort of responsibility the company does have to the public, but I think if you go back to their press releases, all the company said was that, discussions with the FDA were fine. When really they had to go back and forth multiple times to reevaluate their proposal for the FDA to get them to be on board with that. So, but in the end, the FDA did end up approving their report for the phase 3 studies, and the company did use the definitions that they agreed upon in terms of like what responder rate was and things like that. So I don't know if this lawsuit has any legs, but if you look at, where is it? There was like a news thing where all these people came out with, so this one here. So class action lawsuits by tons of different law offices. And, they class action lawsuit lawyers are very anxious to jump on anything. So I don't know, but we'll see how it plays out, and maybe that's something I'm missing. And if somebody wants to chime in and help me out with that, I'd be glad to reconsider my opinion. But I don't know if this is really warranted. Okay, so the other things that were important in relevance to this advisory committee meeting were the safety side effects. So they claimed that they had less side effects. Oliceridine had less side effects compared to morphine. But there were certain things that stood out to the people reviewing the studies. One of them was hepatic problems. So in some of these doses here, and it's kind of strange. So ALT and AST are markers of liver damage when they're elevated in the blood. And you can see here that, percentage-wise, so it's confusing because you would expect the high dose of the drug to have more side effects, but we don't really see that. What we do see instead is the 0.35 milligram dose and the 0.1 dose having relatively higher liver enzymes compared to the 0.5, the placebo, as well as morphine. So the agency was relatively concerned about this, and they talked about this, and really percentage-wise, it's not that different in terms of higher than 5x ULN, but when you get to this higher than 10x, more patients were in the Oliceridine group than in the morphine group. So they had questions about that, and yeah, so that was one of the things that they had problems with, and they were also concerned about this QT prolongation. So I'm not a heart expert by any means, but you have your different intervals with the heartbeat, and apparently these opiates can mess with that, and there was some data to show that this drug had that issue as well. So they talked about that as well. But when it came all to it, at the end they show this nice chart about risk-benefit analysis, and if we look at this, the purple here is morphine, and the other three are the Oliceridine, the different doses of Oliceridine. And in one study, they showed that morphine had an overall benefit. In terms of the risks, though, morphine did have higher risks. And as you get lower dose of Oliceridine, of course, those risks go away, but you also lose efficacy. So one thing that they noted was that the 0.1 dose didn't have significant efficacy compared to placebo in treating pain. And the doses that they were hoping to get approved was the 0.1 and 0.35, I think. But the way they're doing it is they do repeat doses. So if 0.1 isn't enough, then you can take another dose after a certain amount of time. So it's relatively regimented. But the agency is arguing that, given that morphine has this benefit here, and there isn't really a substantial benefit in terms of risks associated with it, that they're not really leaning towards approval, especially because one of the doses that they want approved has not really substantial efficacy. So it might just be the 0.35 dose. I'm gonna have to double check that. But so this is one of their studies, and then in the second study, it's a relatively similar thing. So morphine has a benefit overall compared to the other ones in terms of efficacy, but when it comes to the risks, morphine isn't that much higher. So the way the agency ended up looking at it is they voted each individual, and 7 said yes and 8 said no, and none of them abstained. And this isn't positive for the company moving forward. Most advisory committee meetings end up determining the final approval status. Just to note, though, the Sarepta drug, eteplirsen, was one where they did vote no in the advisory committee, but the FDA itself ended up approving the drug, and there was some drama associated with that. But the point is that this is pretty close. So 7 yes and 8 no, it's pretty close. And really, if we want to be free market capitalists, and this drug isn't worse than morphine, I don't see why the FDA should get in the way of approval of something like this, when having more than one option could bring down the cost for everybody. So this is one of my libertarian problems with the regulatory bodies like this, is they keep out competition. And so So the FDA is going to get in the way, it seems like here. I'm not going to make a play on this company, and I recommend that nobody do that, just given this. The FDA really has very few reasons to approve the drug now. If you think about it, culturally, politically, after the advisory committee and the issues they've had going back and forth with the company really make it seem like it's an easy, pardon me. It makes it very easy for the company just to say no and not worry about it moving forward. So it's unfortunate because I think maybe this would have been a good option if people didn't want to take morphine for one reason or another. But it looks like we're not going to get that. So in terms of takeaways that I thought we should talk about, overall, don't trust what the company says all the time. The FDA has a gag order when it comes to meetings with any company. So after the FDA meets with a company, the company's not allowed to, or the FDA is not allowed to talk about it, but the company is. So you're going to get one-sided information from the company, and it's obviously going to be put in a better light than if the FDA did it. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. The second thing is, when I'm looking at companies, I'm looking for drugs that have either substantially better efficacy or substantially fewer side effects, and not just taking the company statements at face value. So there's always a magnitude of effect, and when they say something is better than something else, by how much? Is it better by only 3% or is it better by like 10%? So I think that's important whenever you're deciding on making a play and risking your hard-earned money. And the last thing is you can get clues into what went on in the actual FDA meetings if you listen to the conference calls. So I make an effort to listen, not all the time because they can be kind of boring, but as much as I can, I listen to the earnings calls or the drug approval, or after phase 3 result. Once they announce a result, the company will often do a conference call, and a lot of the investor side, the buy side, analysts can ask questions, and oftentimes they ask about detailed questions about their meeting with the FDA and how it went. And you can actually get a lot of clues into what they actually talked about. So, you could also watch this podcast or listen to this podcast because I'll be listening to those calls and distilling that information for you. So those are the 3 things that I would say you should do moving forward if you lost out on this. And, there's other things too, like risk management. If you didn't risk that much, which you shouldn't have because this is a very high risk gamble, then you wouldn't be completely blown up. But, that's kind of on that's on more the trading side than it is the actual fundamental side. So anyway, that's what I want to talk about today. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm not going to do a portfolio update. The market has been going through a huge, huge. It's been going through a dip, we'll say a substantial dip right now, and the XBI is definitely taking a hit. I haven't added too much to my positions. I think I bought some more Viking. We should be expecting some news from Spirion, I think, and but otherwise, not much new going on there. But I'll definitely give a portfolio update next week. So thanks a lot for watching, guys, and please like, subscribe, leave me a comment, and we'll see you next time.